My name is Caitlyn, and I'm 33 years old. For 6 years, I was a senior developer at TechVault, single-handedly building their authentication infrastructure. The custom mug gifted by our original founder meant everything to me, until one day it became the center of corporate pettiness that changed everything. When HR demanded hand back the mug its company property, I had no choice. The next morning, 50,000 clients couldn't log in. Instead, they saw a simple message. If you're enjoying this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe and stick around to see how a forgotten domain brought an entire tech company to its knees. TechVault wasn't always the corporate monster it eventually became. When I joined as the 7th employee 6 years ago, we were a scrappy little startup with big dreams working out of a converted warehouse with mismatched furniture and a coffee machine that broke down weekly. Our mission was simple but ambitious. Build a secure, scalable SaaS platform that would help small and medium businesses manage their customer relationships without enterprise-level budgets. Back then, everyone wore multiple hats. I was officially hired as a developer, but that meant everything from coding the core authentication system to occasionally answering support calls and once even assembling office chairs when we expanded to a new floor. Those early days were chaotic but exhilarating. We worked long hours fueled by passion and pizza, celebrating every new client sign-up like we'd won the lottery. The original founder and CEO, Michael Collins, was a technical genius with a clear vision. He recognized my expertise in system architecture immediately and entrusted me with building our authentication infrastructure from the ground up. This wasn't just any login system. It was the backbone of our entire platform. Every single function from data access to permission controls to client billing ran through my code. Michael understood the critical importance of this foundation and gave me the autonomy to build it right. Caitlyn, he told me during my second week, security isn't a feature we add later. It's the foundation everything else stands on. He handed me a ceramic mug with the original TechVault logo, a simple vault door with a digital lock. Welcome to the team that's building that foundation. That mug became my lucky charm, accompanying me through countless late nights as I architected the system that would eventually support 50,000 business clients and their millions of users. In those early days, we moved fast and sometimes overlooked formalities. When we needed to register domains for various services, I used my personal GoDaddy account since the company didn't have a centralized system yet. I registered dozens of domains: app.techvault.com, api.techvault.com, docs.techvault.com, and most critically auth.techvault.com, the domain that handled all authentication services. I wasn't reckless about this arrangement. Over the years, I sent at least 7 emails to our operations team requesting proper domain transfers to company accounts. Each time the response was some version of, "We'll get to it when we have time to set up the corporate accounts properly," or, "It's working fine now. Let's focus on higher priorities." I meticulously documented each of these exchanges, following the proper channels even as my concerns were repeatedly shelved. Everything changed when TechVault secured its Series C funding round of $50 million 3 years ago. Michael stepped back to pursue other projects, and the board brought in Andrew Parker as the new CEO. Andrew came from a marketing background, with minimal technical understanding, but maximum confidence. He had a talent for pitching to investors, and looked good in press photos with his perfectly tailored suits and practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Shortly after Andrew arrived, he brought in Victor Reynolds as CTO. Victor wasn't a technical leader in any meaningful sense. He had an MBA and a career built on managing technical teams without understanding their work. He excelled at corporate politics, always positioned himself to take credit for successes, and had a remarkable talent for being nowhere near failures. Completing this new executive team was Stephanie Wilson, the HR director who viewed company policies as sacred texts, at least when applied to regular employees. For executives, these same policies seemed remarkably flexible. Stephanie was tall, immaculately dressed, and had a way of speaking to non-executives as if explaining concepts to particularly slow children. Not everyone in leadership was problematic. My team lead, Kevin Thompson, was technically brilliant and one of the few managers who actually understood what we built. Unfortunately, he was conflict avoidant to a fault, always promising to advocate for the team, but folding whenever he faced resistance from Victor or Andrew. I couldn't entirely blame him. Those who pushed back too firmly tended to find themselves sidelined or managed out. My closest ally was Lauren Adams, another developer who joined a few months after me. Lauren had a background in cybersecurity and understood both the technical importance of our work and the increasingly toxic company politics. We frequently stayed late, commiserating over takeout about the company's culture shift, while fixing problems the newer, less experienced developers created under Victor's directives. As TechVault grew from 30 employees to over 300, the culture transformed from collaborative to hierarchical. The executive floor became a restricted area. All-hands meetings changed from open discussions to tightly controlled presentations, where questions had to be submitted in advance and were curated before being addressed. The original mission of helping businesses seemed secondary to impressive quarterly growth figures and preparing for an eventual IPO. Through all of this transformation, my authentication system remained the hidden foundation of everything TechVault offered. I expanded it, hardened it against increasingly sophisticated attacks, and scaled it to handle millions of authentication requests daily. It wasn't flashy work that got showcased in sales demos, but without it, nothing else would function. Every user login, every API call, every data request passed through my code, all running smoothly on TechVault. A domain still registered under my personal account because no one ever prioritized transferring it properly. 8 months ago, Andrew announced a major initiative during an all-hands meeting. TechVault needed to rebuild its client portal to handle 10 times the current traffic, while simultaneously cutting infrastructure costs. This seemingly impossible task was presented as an opportunity for the team to demonstrate excellence, corporate speak for working overtime without additional compensation. As the senior architect of our authentication system, I was the obvious choice to lead the technical implementation. My team and I dove into the challenge, recognizing that despite the corporate politics, building something truly exceptional was still worthwhile. For 3 straight months, I worked 12 to 14-hour days. Weekends became extensions of the work week. I canceled a vacation I'd planned for 6 months. Lauren and 2 other developers on my team maintained a similar punishing schedule. We completely reimagined the authentication flow, implementing cutting-edge security protocols while optimizing every function. We reduced database calls by 70%, implemented sophisticated caching mechanisms, and refactored legacy code that had accumulated over years of rapid growth. The result was impressive by any standard. The new system was 42% faster, slashed infrastructure costs by 68%, and enhanced security in ways even I was proud of. When launch day arrived, everything went flawlessly, a rarity for major system overhauls. Our monitoring dashboards showed the performance improvements immediately. Client support received unsolicited compliments about the improved speed. By any measure, this was a massive success that the entire team deserved to celebrate. A company-wide meeting was scheduled to recognize the achievement. I arrived early, my trusted TechVault mug filled with fresh coffee, expecting at least a brief acknowledgement of my team's extraordinary effort. What followed instead was a masterclass in credit appropriation. Andrew kicked off the meeting with a PowerPoint presentation titled, TechVault's Next Generation Platform, A Vision Realized. For 45 minutes, he and Victor took turns explaining how their strategic direction and executive technical leadership had transformed the company's infrastructure. They used screenshots of my code and architecture diagrams I had created without once mentioning me or my team. When I challenged our leadership team to reimagine our technical foundation, Andrew said, gesturing to Victor, I knew we had the vision to make it happen. Victor nodded solemnly. By applying enterprise architecture principles and leveraging cross-functional synergies, we achieved the performance targets while optimizing operational expenditure. Listening to them use meaningless business jargon to describe our technical achievement was infuriating. The slides showed my actual code with my comment headers removed. At one point, Victor explained a complex authentication pattern as if he had invented it, when in reality he had questioned why we needed it during the one architecture review he bothered to attend. Lauren kept shooting me sideways, glances her expression a mix of disbelief and anger on my behalf. Kevin stared at his notebook, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. The other developers on the team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I maintained my composure throughout the presentation, though my knuckles turned white around my mug handle. This wasn't the first time executives had taken credit for technical work, but the sheer audacity of the theft, especially after the personal sacrifices we had made, was breathtaking. The following week, a major client requested an urgent meeting to discuss expanding their implementation to their international divisions. This would potentially triple their subscription value, making them our largest client. Since I had designed the multi-tenant architecture that would make this expansion possible, the account manager requested I join the meeting. I arrived at the executive conference room clutching my mug, a habit when I was nervous about presenting technical details to non-technical audiences. Andrew and Victor were already there along with the potential clients. No one had bothered to introduce me, so I quietly took a seat at the far end of the table. As the meeting progressed, the client's CTO asked specific questions about how our authentication system would handle their European regulatory requirements. Andrew looked momentarily panicked before smoothly saying, "Those are excellent questions. Let me have our technical team address them." All eyes turned to me clearly, not expecting someone they hadn't been introduced to would speak. I explained the system's compliance features, detailing how we handled data sovereignty and regional authentication requirements. The client's team looked impressed and started asking follow-up questions that I answered confidently. Andrew's expression soured as the conversation continued directly between me and the client's technical team. After I finished explaining a particularly complex aspect of our regional data handling, he interjected, "I didn't realize we were inviting junior staff to this meeting." The room fell silent. The implication was clear. He was diminishing my role and expertise to reassert his authority. I felt my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice level, "I'm the senior architect who designed and built the authentication system we're discussing. I've been with TechVault for 6 years." The client's CTO looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Victor's face darkened with barely controlled anger at being contradicted in front of clients, while Andrew's practiced smile became rigid. Of course, Andrew recovered quickly. "Caitlyn has been a valuable resource on our development team. Now about your expansion timeline." The meeting proceeded, but the atmosphere had shifted. I noticed the client directing their technical questions directly to me, despite Andrew's attempts to intercept them. We ultimately secured the expansion deal, largely because I was able to address their security concerns convincingly. The following day, I was at my desk reviewing pull requests when a shadow fell across my keyboard. I looked up to see Stephanie from HR standing there, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes cold. "Caitlyn," she said loudly enough that nearby developers turned to watch, "I need to speak with you about company property." I stared up at Stephanie, confused by her sudden appearance and public approach. "Company property?" "Yes," she replied, voice carrying across the open office. "I need to discuss the unauthorized use of executive reserved items." Her eyes fixed pointedly on my desk where my TechVault mug sat beside my keyboard. Several nearby developers paused their work, pretending not to listen while obviously absorbing every word. I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment but kept my voice steady. "This mug was a personal gift from Michael Collins when I joined the company 6 years ago. It's not executive reserved property." Stephanie's professionally neutral expression didn't waver. "According to our updated inventory guidelines, all items bearing the original company logo are classified as executive suite materials. They're not authorized for general staff use, especially in client-facing situations." The absurdity of the situation was beginning to sink in. I was being publicly reprimanded over a coffee mug while the entire development floor watched. This wasn't about a mug. This was retaliation for contradicting Andrew and Victor in the client meeting. "There must be some mistake," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "I've used this mug daily for 6 years without issue. It was given to me personally by the founding CEO. The previous CEO's actions are not relevant to current company policies," Stephanie replied coldly. "I'll need you to hand over the unauthorized item immediately. Additionally, this incident will require documentation in your personnel file." Lauren, sitting 2 desks away, had stopped pretending to work and was openly watching the confrontation, to her expression, a mix of shock and outrage on my behalf. Kevin, who should have intervened as my team lead, was conspicuously absent from the floor. With 24 colleagues watching, I had little choice. I picked up my mug, still half full of coffee, and handed it to Stephanie, who held it with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said. "Please check your email for a formal notice regarding this policy violation and schedule a time to discuss professional conduct expectations." As she walked away, mug in hand, the development floor remained unnaturally quiet. I turned back to my computer face, burning with humiliation, and tried to focus on my work as whispers began to circulate. The formal warning arrived in my email within the hour. It cited insubordination, unauthorized use of executive materials, and most ridiculously unprofessional conduct during client engagements. The email required my acknowledgment and included a mandatory meeting with Stephanie to discuss performance improvement strategies. This public humiliation was clearly just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, a systematic pattern of exclusion emerged. Meeting invites I'd normally receive stopped coming. Email threads where I'd previously been included now omitted me until someone realized they needed technical information only I possessed. When I did attend meetings, my input was frequently interrupted or dismissed. My workspace was relocated from the main developer area to an isolated corner near the supply closet, officially due to team restructuring. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was being pushed to the margins. Most of my colleagues began to keep their distance, likely fearing association with someone who had clearly fallen from favor. Only Lauren maintained our friendship openly, making a point to have lunch with me and regularly stopping by my new isolated desk. "This is complete garbage," she said one afternoon, voice low. "Everyone knows you built the entire authentication system. They're just intimidated because you know more than they do." Kevin occasionally checked in, though, always when no one else was around. "Just keep your head down," he advised uncomfortably. "This will blow over once they find a new target." I nodded, but didn't really believe it. Instead, I began meticulously documenting everything, saving emails, recording meeting notes, and updating my resume. 6 years of dedication to TechVault had earned me nothing but scorn from leadership, who viewed technical expertise as a threat rather than an asset. 3 weeks after the mug incident, I received an automated email notification. "Your system access permissions have been adjusted for security compliance reasons." Checking my admin console, I discovered my access to several critical systems had been revoked or downgraded, ostensibly for routine security protocol updates. That afternoon, Kevin stopped by my desk, glancing around nervously before speaking. "Listen," he said quietly. "I overheard Victor and Andrew discussing restructuring the authentication team for better alignment with strategic objectives. They specifically mentioned finding someone more collaborative to manage the system. The corporate doublespeak was transparent. They were planning to push me out and replace me with someone who wouldn't challenge them, someone who would let them take credit for technical achievements without correction." "Thanks for the heads up," I said, feeling oddly calm despite the betrayal. 6 years of building their core systems, 3 months of grueling work to rebuild their platform, and countless nights and weekends sacrificed for the company, all meaningless to leadership concerned only with their own status. That night I barely slept. My mind cycled through disbelief, anger, and eventually a cold determination. I had built my career on technical excellence and integrity. If TechVault no longer valued those qualities, perhaps it was time to find somewhere that did. The final confirmation came unexpectedly. I was returning from lunch when I walked past a conference room with glass walls. Inside, Victor was interviewing a young developer I didn't recognize. On the whiteboard behind them was a diagram of my authentication system architecture labeled Authentication Team Restructuring Plan. My position on the org chart had been erased and redrawn with a question mark. Just 3 months earlier, Kevin had told me I was on track for a promotion to principal engineer. Now I was watching my replacement being interviewed through a glass wall like a museum exhibit of corporate betrayal. Lauren found me that evening still at my desk, staring blankly at my monitor. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "More like I've seen my own professional funeral being planned," I replied, and told her about the interview I'd witnessed. She cursed under her breath. "This place has become toxic." "You know that, right? This isn't normal or acceptable." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to even feel angry anymore. "I've updated my LinkedIn profile. Already had 2 recruiters reach out." "Good," Lauren said firmly. "You deserve better than this." As I packed up to leave an email, notification appeared on my screen, a calendar invite titled Performance Discussion scheduled for Monday morning with Andrew, Victor, and Stephanie. No agenda, no details. "Well," I said to Lauren, attempting a smile that felt more like a grimace, "looks like I won't need those recruiter calls after all." I spent the weekend in a strange emotional limbo, oscillating between anxiety about Monday's meeting and relief that the situation was finally coming to a head. On Saturday, I reorganized my home office, preparing for what would likely be a period of job hunting. I updated my portfolio with sanitized examples of my work, careful to remove anything that might violate my confidentiality agreements with TechVault. Sunday afternoon, while sorting through a filing cabinet of old work documents, I found a folder labeled Domain Registrations 2018 to 2019. Inside were confirmation emails from GoDaddy for the various TechVault domains I'd registered using my personal account during the company's early days. I paused, remembering the numerous requests I'd sent to have these properly transferred to corporate accounts. Curious about their current status, I logged into my GoDaddy account for the first time in months. To my surprise, while most of the domains had eventually been transferred, auth.techvault.com, the domain handling all user authentication, was still under my personal control. This oversight was remarkable, considering its critical importance. The authentication domain was the gatekeeper for the entire TechVault ecosystem. Every user login, every API authentication token, every session validation passed through this domain. Without it, no one could access any TechVault service. I scrolled through my email archives, finding at least 7 separate threads where I'd specifically requested this domain be properly transferred. The most recent was from just 6 months ago, where the IT operations team responded that they were prioritizing customer-facing domains and would address internal infrastructure domains in the next quarter. The company's negligence in formalizing ownership of such a critical asset was shocking, but not entirely surprising given the growing dysfunction. I sat back in my chair, suddenly aware of the power this oversight had inadvertently placed in my hands. If I modified the DNS settings for auth.techvault.com, I could effectively shut down access to the entire platform for all 50,000 business clients. I could redirect traffic anywhere, to an error page, to a competitor, or to a message of my choosing. The thought made my stomach tighten. I had always prided myself on professional ethics. In 6 years, I had never abused my access or compromised the security of the systems I built. Even now, facing unjust termination, the idea of deliberately causing harm felt wrong. But was it harm to simply tell the truth? To let clients know why they suddenly couldn't access the systems they depended on? Not to damage the company, but to ensure my contributions weren't erased along with my employment. I closed my laptop without making any changes, deciding to sleep on such a consequential decision. Whatever happened in Monday's meeting would determine my next steps. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I dressed professionally, not for TechVault but for my own dignity, and arrived precisely on time for the 9 a.m. meeting. The conference room contained Andrew, Victor, and Stephanie seated on one side of the table, a united front. The chair opposite them sat empty, awaiting me like a defendant's seat in a courtroom. "Caitlyn, please sit down," Andrew began, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of someone who believed terminating employees demonstrated his executive fortitude. "We've asked you here to discuss some concerns about your performance and alignment with company values." I sat silently, noting that no one had prepared a notepad or document for me. This wasn't a discussion, it was a pronouncement. Victor leaned forward, his expensive watch catching the light. "As you know, TechVault has been evolving toward a more collaborative culture. Unfortunately, we've observed patterns in your interaction style that don't align with our leadership vision." Specifically, Stephanie interjected, sliding a document across the table. "We've documented several instances of insubordination, unauthorized system access, and unprofessional conduct toward executive leadership." I glanced at the document. It cited the client meeting where I'd corrected Andrew's misrepresentation of my role, the unauthorized use of executive materials, the mug and bizarrely excessive technical complexity, creating dependency on individual contributors. Essentially, I was being criticized for building systems too sophisticated for less skilled developers to easily modify. "There's also concern," Victor continued, "about technical performance issues in systems you've overseen. We've identified inefficiencies that suggest insufficient attention to optimization best practices." This was a blatant lie. My authentication system was the most efficient component of our platform, recently rebuilt, to be 42% faster while cutting infrastructure costs by 68%. Victor was counting on the fact that Andrew and Stephanie lacked the technical knowledge to recognize this fabrication. "I'd like to respond to these points," I began, but Andrew raised his hand to silence me. "We've made our decision after careful consideration," he said. "TechVault will be terminating your employment effective immediately." Stephanie pushed another document forward, a severance agreement offering 2 weeks' pay in exchange for waiving any right to dispute my termination. The amount was insultingly small after 6 years of service, and contrary to the company's own policy of 1 month per year of employment for involuntary separations. "We'll need your badge, laptop, and any other company property before you leave," Stephanie added, her eyes fixed on my empty hands, "including the company mug if you've taken it back." "The mug is in my desk drawer," I said, my voice steady despite the anger and hurt churning inside me. "I haven't used it since you confiscated it 3 weeks ago." "We'll need to verify that," she replied coldly. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings and ensure all company property is returned." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the conference room door. I'd seen them greet employees with friendly smiles every morning for years. Now they stared at me impassively, as if I'd transformed into a potential threat overnight. Andrew stood signaling the meeting's end. "For the record, Caitlyn, this outcome could have been avoided if you'd shown more willingness to collaborate with leadership. Technical skills alone aren't enough at a company of our caliber." The message was clear. Expertise was worthless without obedience. Excellence meant nothing without submission to the hierarchy. My 6 years of building their core systems, the nights and weekends, sacrificed the authentication infrastructure that enabled their entire business. All irrelevant because I hadn't shown proper deference to executives who couldn't write a line of code. I was escorted to my desk by the security guards with Stephanie, following closely behind. Colleagues stopped typing as we passed conversations, halting mid-sentence. Everyone understood what was happening. This theatrical procession was designed to humiliate and serve as a warning to others. At my desk, I collected my few personal items: a family photo, a small plant, a technical book. Stephanie watched each item I touched, occasionally asking, "Is that company property about objects that were clearly personal?" When I opened my drawer to retrieve my bag, she spotted the TechVault mug sitting there. Her eyes narrowed. "Hand back the mug, it's company property," she demanded loudly enough for the entire floor to hear. I silently passed her the mug, acutely aware of dozens of eyes watching this final indignity. Lauren tried to approach from across the floor, but one of the security guards stepped forward to block her path. "Your building access is being deactivated," Stephanie informed me as we walked toward the exit. "Please delete any company data from your personal devices immediately. The severance agreement must be signed within 48 hours to receive payment." There was no exit interview, no acknowledgement of 6 years of service, not even a perfunctory good luck. By the time we reached the building's front doors, my access badge had already been deactivated. I couldn't have returned even if I'd forgotten something. I sat in my car in the parking garage, hands shaking slightly, as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. 6 years of my professional life had just ended with less consideration than canceling a subscription service. I had been erased from TechVault as efficiently as Victor had erased my position from his whiteboard diagram. As I started the car, a thought returned with sudden clarity. auth.techvault.com was still registered under my personal GoDaddy account. After all their talk about security protocols and company property, they had never properly secured ownership of the very domain that controlled access to their entire platform. The irony was almost too perfect. They had taken back a ceramic mug while forgetting the digital keys to their kingdom. I drove home in a daze, the morning's events replaying in an endless loop, the calculated humiliation of the security escort, the colleagues who looked away as I passed, Stephanie's final demand for the mug that had somehow become a symbol of my disposability. By the time I arrived home, shock had given way to a cold, clarifying anger. My phone buzzed with text messages from Lauren. "What happened? Are you okay? This is complete BS. Everyone is talking about how they escorted you out. Andrew just sent an email saying you decided to pursue other opportunities. Such a liar." Another message came from Kevin. "This wasn't right. I should have said something. I'm sorry." Their support was appreciated but couldn't undo what had happened. I spent the afternoon alternating between updating my resume and staring blankly at the wall, processing the abrupt end to a significant chapter of my professional life. As evening approached, I opened my laptop and logged into my GoDaddy account again. The auth.techvault.com domain sat there among my personal domains, its status-active DNS settings pointing to TechVault's authentication servers. I had built those servers, written every line of code that processed millions of authentication requests daily. Now I couldn't even access the system I had created. I opened my email archives and systematically reviewed every communication about domain ownership. The evidence was unambiguous. I had repeatedly requested proper transfer following all protocols and escalating appropriately when my requests were ignored. The company's negligence was thoroughly documented. I considered my options carefully. I could do nothing, allowing TechVault to continue operating on infrastructure they didn't properly own until someone eventually noticed the oversight. I could contact them professionally, pointing out the domain issue and offering to transfer it properly, a final act of professional courtesy they hadn't extended to me. Or I could take action that would make my unfair termination impossible to ignore. The ethics of the situation weren't simple. The domain legally belonged to me. I had paid for it with my personal credit card and maintained ownership when the company repeatedly ignored transfer requests. But I had registered it for company use while employed there, creating a gray area of intended purpose versus legal ownership. Would redirecting the domain be illegal? Possibly not, given the documented ownership. Would it be ethical? That was a harder question. It would certainly cause disruption to TechVault and its clients. But it might also force accountability for a company culture that discarded dedicated employees while failing to secure its critical infrastructure. I wasn't interested in causing permanent damage or compromising customer data. That line I wouldn't cross. But perhaps there was a middle path, a temporary disruption that would highlight the consequences of their actions without causing lasting harm. With this framework in mind, I began creating a simple web page. It contained no proprietary information, no confidential data, nothing that violated my employment agreements, just a straightforward message. Authentication services temporarily unavailable. The senior architect who built this system was terminated on Monday after 6 years of service. For inquiries, please contact TechVault executive leadership. Below this, I added an important clarification. No customer data has been accessed or compromised. This is an informational notice only. Service will be restored promptly, following appropriate discussions with TechVault leadership. I included my professional email address for verification that this was indeed coming from me, not a random attacker. Everything was factual, nothing defamatory or exaggerated. With the page prepared, I returned to my GoDaddy account and examined the DNS settings for auth.techvault.com. Currently, it pointed to TechVault's authentication servers through records I had configured years ago. Changing these settings would redirect all authentication requests to my simple message instead. I hesitated, finger hovering over the keyboard. This was a significant step that couldn't be easily undone. Once DNS changes propagated across the internet, every TechVault client would be unable to log in until the settings were restored. I thought about Andrew's dismissive tone. Technical skills alone aren't enough. Victor's lies about performance issues in systems he barely understood. Stephanie's public humiliation campaign over a coffee mug. The security escort past colleagues I'd worked alongside for years. I made my decision. I updated the DNS settings to point to my hosted message page and set the TTL time to live value to 24 hours, meaning the changes would propagate slowly across the internet. Some users would see the effects within hours, others not until the following day. After saving the changes, I closed my laptop and sat back. There was no turning back now. By morning, TechVault would begin experiencing authentication failures. By afternoon, the problem would be widespread. Eventually, someone would discover the DNS changes and understand what had happened. I felt an odd mixture of anxiety and vindication. I hadn't compromised any systems, accessed any data, or violated security protocols. I had simply exercised control over a domain that legally belonged to me, a domain the company had repeatedly declined to properly transfer despite my documented requests. Whatever happened next, TechVault's leadership would be forced to acknowledge the technical infrastructure they had taken for granted and the employee they had discarded. They had taken back a coffee mug while forgetting who controlled the keys to their digital kingdom. That night I slept surprisingly well for someone who had just set in motion potentially career-defining consequences. Whatever happened next, I had stood up for myself in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. After months of being marginalized and years of having my contributions overlooked, that alone felt like a victory. My phone started ringing at 5:30 in the morning. Still groggy, I checked the screen. Lauren calling. I answered to her breathless voice. "What did you do? The authentication system is down and it's absolute chaos here." I sat up suddenly, fully awake. The DNS changes are propagating already. East Coast clients started calling around 5 a.m. when their employees couldn't log in. It's spreading west with the time zones. The IT team is completely freaking out because they can't figure out what's wrong. The system shows everything running normally, but users are seeing some message about you being fired. The DNS changes had propagated faster than I'd expected. With a 24-hour TTL, some internet service providers were already directing authentication traffic to my message page. People are taking screenshots, Lauren continued. It's all over Twitter. Number TechVault down is trending already. My phone buzzed with another incoming call, a number I didn't recognize. I should go, I told Lauren. Keep me posted if you can. I switched to the unknown caller. Hello? Is this Caitlyn Davis? Asked a professional-sounding woman. Yes, who's calling? This is Sarah Mitchell from TechCrunch. We're covering the TechVault outage and would like to get your statement about the message users are seeing. News traveled fast in the tech world. I have no comment at this time, I replied and ended the call. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls from unknown numbers, likely more journalists, and messages from former colleagues. I silenced it and opened my laptop to assess the situation. Twitter was ablaze with screenshots of my message. Tech news sites had already published breaking stories with headlines like TechVault authentication system down after developer firing and 500,000 businesses locked out of TechVault after employee termination. I hadn't anticipated the speed and scale of the public reaction. What I'd intended as a targeted message to TechVault leadership had become a very public incident, affecting thousands of businesses and potentially millions of end users. A text came through from Kevin. Complete meltdown here. Andrew and Victor arrived an hour ago looking like they've seen ghosts. They've got the entire IT security team trying to figure out what happened. No one can find any system issues. Everything shows green except users can't get in. I felt a momentary pang of guilt for the frontline support staff dealing with angry customers. They weren't responsible for the executive decisions that led to this situation. But the alternative would have been allowing my unfair termination to pass without consequence. Another forgotten employee, discarded by a company that valued hierarchy over contribution. My email notification chimed. The sender was TechVault's legal department. Miss Davis, we have reason to believe you are involved in the current service disruption affecting TechVault's authentication systems. This constitutes unauthorized access to company systems and potential violation of computer fraud statutes. Cease any disruptive activities immediately and contact us to resolve this situation before we pursue legal remedies. Failure to respond will result in immediate legal action. The email mischaracterized what had happened. I hadn't accessed any TechVault systems or servers. I had simply modified DNS settings for a domain I legally owned, a domain the company had repeatedly declined to properly transfer despite my documented requests. Before I could consider a response, my phone rang with another call from Lauren. They're freaking out even more now, she said, her voice hushed as if she was hiding to make the call. Someone finally checked the DNS settings and discovered the domain is registered to your personal account. Andrew went completely purple when he heard. He's threatening criminal charges against you. They don't have grounds, I replied more confidently than I felt. I've documented every request to transfer the domain that they ignored. I legally own it. Well, they're calling an emergency board meeting. Apparently, they're already getting calls from major investors concerned about the security implications. The stock is down 24% in pre-market trading. That was significant. TechVault was a publicly traded company now, and a major service outage combined with apparent security oversights could have serious financial consequences. My phone showed another incoming call, this time from a name I recognized immediately, Michael Collins, TechVault's original founder. Though he was no longer involved in day-to-day operations, he remained on the board of directors. Michael, I answered, I'm guessing you've heard what's happening. His familiar laugh surprised me. Heard, Caitlyn? It's all anyone in tech is talking about today. I have to say it's the most interesting thing to happen at TechVault since I left. Though I'm getting frantic calls from board members wondering how we're going to contain the PR disaster. Are you angry? I asked hesitantly. With you, number disappointed that it came to this, certainly. But I always warned the board that treating technical talent as disposable would eventually backfire. I'm more surprised it took this long. He paused. That said, we need to resolve this quickly. 50,000 businesses can't access their accounts. I'm open to resolution, I said carefully, but I won't simply hand over the domain after how I was treated. Understandable, Michael replied. The board has called an emergency meeting in 30 minutes. Would you be willing to join via conference call to discuss terms? This was moving faster than I'd anticipated. What kind of terms? That's to be negotiated, but I suspect the board will be motivated to find an acceptable solution given the circumstances. And for what it's worth, I'll be advocating for fair treatment. I agreed to join the call, then spent the next 30 minutes gathering all my documentation, emails, requesting domain transfers, performance reviews, showing my exceptional contributions, correspondence about the authentication system rebuild that had saved the company millions in infrastructure costs. When the conference call connected, I could hear multiple voices speaking urgently before they noticed my presence. The board chair, Eleanor Blackwell, took control of the conversation. Miss Davis, I'm Eleanor Blackwell, chair of TechVault's board. We're facing an unprecedented service outage that our technical team attributes to DNS changes on a domain apparently registered under your personal account. Can you confirm your involvement? Yes, I replied simply. The auth.techvault.com domain is registered under my personal GoDaddy account. I updated the DNS settings last night. A chorus of voices began speaking at once before Eleanor restored order. And you're aware this has resulted in a complete authentication outage for all TechVault customers. I am. Just as I was aware when I sent 7 documented requests over 4 years to have the domain properly transferred to company ownership, all of which were ignored. I'm also aware that I was terminated yesterday after 6 years of service, including building the entire authentication system that TechVault relies on. Andrew's voice cut in. This is clear sabotage and... Andrew Eleanor interrupted firmly. Let me handle this. She returned to addressing me. Miss Davis, regardless of past issues, we need to restore service to our customers immediately. What would it take to resolve this situation today? I had given this considerable thought. I need 3 things. First, proper severance according to company policy, 1 month's salary per year of service, which would be 6 months' pay. Second, a formal recommendation letter acknowledging my contributions to TechVault's core infrastructure. Third, a public statement clarifying that my departure was not performance-related. Victor's voice emerged indignant. This is extortion. We should be pursuing criminal charges, not negotiating. Michael spoke up for the first time. Before we throw around terms like extortion, perhaps we should consider our legal position. Our legal team has reviewed the domain registration and confirms it is legitimately registered to Miss Davis personally. Our company repeatedly failed to properly transfer ownership despite her documented requests. This appears to be a business dispute regarding domain ownership, not a criminal matter. A new voice joined the conversation, likely TechVault's general counsel. Mr. Collins is correct. While we could pursue civil remedies, characterizing this as criminal activity would be problematic given the documentation Miss Davis has provided. Additionally, any legal action would extend the service outage and further damage our reputation with customers. The call fell silent as the implications sank in. Eleanor spoke again, her tone more conciliatory. Miss Davis, your requests seem reasonable under the circumstances. However, we would need to add a non-disclosure agreement regarding this incident and confirmation that no customer data was accessed or compromised. I already stated in my message that no customer data was accessed, I replied. I built the authentication system with multiple security layers, specifically to prevent that kind of vulnerability. And I'm willing to sign an NDA provided it allows me to acknowledge that I worked at TechVault and built its authentication infrastructure in my future employment. After some discussion among the board members, Eleanor returned with their response. We can agree to these terms with one addition. Andrew and Victor would like to be present for the DNS transfer to ensure it's completed properly. I almost laughed at the irony. Now they were concerned about proper domain transfer procedures. That's fine, but I'll need the severance payment processed and documents signed before I update the DNS settings. Several more minutes of negotiation followed, but ultimately the board agreed to my terms. They had little choice. Every minute the outage continued cost them in customer confidence and stock value. By noon we had a signed agreement the severance payment was processing, and I had written acknowledgment of my contributions to TechVault's infrastructure. The most satisfying moment came during the video call to transfer the domain settings. Andrew and Victor were visibly seething, but forced to maintain professional composure as I walked them through accessing the GoDaddy account and properly updating the DNS settings to restore service. Neither could look me in the eye as I explained each step as if to novice users, which in many ways they were. "And that completes the transfer," I said finally. "Authentication services should begin restoring as DNS changes propagate, though it may take up to 24 hours for all users to regain access." "Thank you for your cooperation," Andrew said stiffly, the words clearly painful for him to utter. As agreed, TechVault issued a public statement later that day, acknowledging a configuration issue with their authentication domain and thanking me by name for 6 years of valuable contributions to TechVault's core infrastructure, carefully worded to fulfill our agreement while saving face. The tech press wasn't fooled. Articles with headlines like TechVault authentication outage linked to employee termination dispute and domain oversight causes major disruption at TechVault proliferated across industry publications. The incident would become a cautionary tale about proper infrastructure management and treatment of technical staff. By evening, my professional email was filled with messages from recruiters who had connected the dots between the outage, my sudden departure from TechVault, and my 6 years building authentication systems. What Andrew and Victor had intended as a humiliating dismissal had inadvertently become the most effective resume boost imaginable. 3 weeks after the TechVault incident, I sat across from Michael Collins in a small coffee shop downtown. He had reached out the previous day asking to meet in person rather than over the phone. I arrived early, unsure what to expect. "I've been thinking about authentication systems lately," he said, with a smile after we exchanged greetings. "Specifically, about people who know how to build them properly." "Funny coincidence," I replied, returning his smile. "I've been thinking about companies that properly value those people." Michael nodded, his expression turning more serious. "I'm starting a new venture. Nothing public yet, but I'm assembling a team to build something interesting in the financial technology space. I need someone who understands security from the ground up. Someone who can architect systems that protect sensitive data while remaining usable." Sounds like an interesting challenge. It is. The position is technical director, reporting directly to me. Complete ownership of the security architecture. Proper recognition for your work. And he added with a knowing look, a company culture that doesn't treat developers as replaceable parts. We spent the next hour discussing his vision for the new company. By the end of our conversation, I had verbally accepted his offer, which included equity that could potentially dwarf the severance payment from TechVault if the venture succeeded. "One more thing," Michael said as we were preparing to leave. "I've already registered all the domains we'll need properly under company accounts. But I'd appreciate if you'd double-check our security processes once you start, just to make sure we haven't missed anything." I laughed. "I think I can handle that." The transition to Michael's new company, Secure Finance, was everything my experience at TechVault had not been in its later years. From day one, my expertise was respected, and my contributions acknowledged. I implemented proper domain management protocols, immediately ensuring all digital assets were properly registered and documented. Over the following months, I built a security architecture that would become the foundation of Secure Finance's success. When we launched 6 months later, the authentication system was highlighted as a key differentiator in our industry communications. My name appeared prominently in the technical documentation and press releases. Michael gifted me a new custom mug on launch day featuring a domain name and DNS settings as the design. "Just a reminder," he said with a wink, "that sometimes the most important parts of a system are the ones people take for granted until they stop working." 2 months after our launch, Lauren reached out to ask if Secure Finance was hiring. "TechVault has become unbearable," she wrote. "They've implemented so many new security protocols that we can barely do our jobs, and there's a company-wide mandate never to mention the incident or your name." I spoke with Michael, who immediately approved creating a position for her. Kevin followed 3 months later, along with 2 other talented developers from my former team. Each brought stories of declining morale and increasingly rigid policies at TechVault, where technical excellence had become secondary to procedural compliance. The industry impact of the incident extended beyond TechVault. Technology companies across Silicon Valley initiated domain ownership audits, discovering numerous similar oversights in their own infrastructure. Several implemented new policies, specifically addressing personal registration of company domains, informally known as the Caitlyn policy, among IT professionals. As for TechVault, their recovery from the incident was complicated. While service was restored within 24 hours, the reputational damage lingered. Several major clients cited the outage when declining to renew their contracts. The stock price took months to recover, and the board began asking harder questions about technical leadership. 8 months after my departure, I received a message from a former colleague still at TechVault. Both Andrew and Victor had been pursuing other opportunities, the same euphemism they had used for my termination. The board had replaced them with leadership that had actual technical backgrounds and understood the value of the people who built their systems. Looking back now, the incident taught me several valuable lessons. First, technical excellence alone isn't enough in corporate environments. You need leadership that values that excellence rather than feeling threatened by it. Second, proper documentation and ownership of digital assets isn't just good practice. It's essential protection for both companies and individuals. And finally, standing up for yourself professionally, while sometimes difficult, is necessary for maintaining both your career and your dignity. The ceramic mug that sparked the confrontation now sits on my desk at Secure Finance, a gift from Michael, who somehow retrieved it from TechVault. Beside it stands the domain-themed mug representing the new chapter in my career. Together they remind me daily that true value comes not from titles or office politics, but from building things that matter and being recognized for that contribution. As technologists, we create the foundations that others build upon. When those foundations are solid, everything else can flourish. When they're neglected or taken for granted, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. The same principle applies to people. When you value and respect those who build your foundations, your organization thrives. When you discard them, you may find your entire structure at risk. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself professionally when your contributions weren't being valued? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. And if you found my story helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to see more of my professional journey, and share this with someone who might need encouragement to advocate for themselves. Remember, sometimes the most powerful move isn't leaving quietly. It's ensuring your true value is recognized, even if that recognition comes in unexpected ways. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.